If you just joined us, thank you. Or if you're watching the recording online, uh, thanks for joining us. We do these webinars roughly every 2 weeks is what we aim for. And the goal of these webinars is to be really condensed, short sessions that you can watch during a workday without too much disruption that go into interesting topics for intermediate to advanced Looker developers. So we like to cover stuff that is a little bit less covered by Looker docs or maybe less known about by the average Looker developer and try to really get into some of the interesting features and things available. So if you haven't already, we do our Q&A in Slack. I'm going to post the link one more time to our Slack workspace and the name of the channel where we'll be doing Q&A. So join us over there. Let us know where you're calling in from, and we'll make sure your questions get answered after Simon's presentation is done. So with that out of the way, I am going to introduce Simon Clark. So we have the privilege of having Simon with us today. Simon has a wealth of experience in Looker. He's been a consultant for over 8 years and working on all different kinds of instances and seeing what works and what doesn't. And particularly, Simon has some experience white labeling Looker, which is a topic of interest to a lot of our customers at Spectacles and folks in the larger Looker ecosystem. So he's going to give us a rundown on everything he's learned to do and not to do in his time as a Looker consultant. And I will hand it over to him to get started, and we'll do questions after. So feel free to post them at any point in Slack, and we'll answer them all at the end.
Thanks, Josh. Okay, so I'll give you a little intro to myself first. I've been using Looker as a user, developer, admin since 2015. Quite quickly after that job, I started working as a Looker consultant. A recruiter found me, offered me a consulting gig, which is very attractive, and that's what I've been doing ever since. Just celebrated my 8-year Looker anniversary, which is a thing that I have about 5 weeks ago. And in that time, I've been very lucky. I've worked for quite a few interesting companies, different sizes. There's quite a few well-known names there. I think all of those except one are still using Looker as well, which I guess is a good thing. And obviously, over that time, as Josh says, I've learned a lot of stuff. And this is supposed to be a quick guide. Inevitably, when you come to sit down to write out what you know about something, it can end up being a lot. So there's quite a lot of information here. I'm going to talk fairly quickly. I'm also going to try and skip over some of it because hopefully you don't need me to explain to you how everything works in Looker. There will be Q&A afterwards, and I am also, like, in general, always happy to talk about Looker if there's something you want to talk about in more detail. I'm also not just a Looker person. I mean, Looker has been my professional life completely for about 8 years. Quite like running. This is me doing the Beachy Head 10K trail run, which is very hilly and windy and rainy. I actually managed to get a personal record, which is quite good, but I've been running a lot recently. Anyway, just a little bit about it's not Looker. I am genuinely always happy to talk about Looker. You know, if a lot of the time I can just answer a question or signpost you, and if it's something I don't know, then I'm very keen to know what that gap is in my knowledge to fill. So please do get in touch. I've got a bit of a cheeky vanity URL on LinkedIn. I have a website where I post Looker tips, also post them on LinkedIn, although it's been a while. You can email if that's your thing. I'm also available in the Spectacles Slack, which is much nicer for chatting than LinkedIn. So on with the show. White labeling Looker. So you might have seen a diagram like this that shows kind of the Looker platform and maybe ecosystem a bit. And the top left part with the web interface is where we'll be spending most of our time, what we're most familiar with. To the right of that is embedding. And embedding is where you take parts of what you built in Looker and put them within your own kind of web app or mobile application and integrate the two so that your authorization gets passed into Looker and your application can run the dashboards and that sort of thing. That's quite in depth, and actually, like, white labeling, I think, sits kind of between the two because it's the easiest, most direct way to turn Looker around and point it at your clients, your partners externally, rather than normally where it'd be internal, without having to go through the hassle of actually like building a separate app or integrating into an app. Plus, you know, if you've done some white labeling stuff and you've built that instance to face your partners, and then you decide to later to look at embedding, you can reuse the work that you've already done there. I haven't actually defined what white labeling is. It's basically taking a product and putting your own branding on it. So in our case, we're talking about Looker, which we all know and love. And we're putting on a disguise, which is maybe not the most convincing disguise if you know Looker, but it serves the purpose. And the white labeling options essentially do three things. They allow you to remove the Looker logo and replace it with your own, take out mentions of Looker so you can pretend that it's not Looker at all, and customize the messaging that your users see. Because of how these settings work, it's not something that I could really do a demonstration of, but I did a little mock-up using a Looker instance. And you can see it is just Looker. There's login screen with my logo on. There's the homepage with my logo on. That's my admin account. So it's probably not what your partner user would see. You wouldn't give them the develop menu, the admin menu, dashboard, explore, and it's just Looker. Why you would do this? Thinking about this, I think this sentence it basically encapsulates every use case for white labeling, really. It's very likely that it's going to be a business-to-business context. If you're building something for consumers, you probably either be doing the full embedding thing or something completely separate. You're probably not going to want to pay for a Looker license for every single one of your customers. And obviously, within this scenario, there are different kinds of context. Like you might have 3 partners who are huge, or you might have a few hundred. Say, someone like maybe Deliveroo might want to use white labeling or even embedding, so their restaurants or their riders can get access to some data. Again, probably be quite expensive, but it's a possibility. I think probably one of the main reasons people do this is that they're already using Looker, because if you're doing that, you're most of the way there already. Assuming you've got Looker working and doing what you want and exposing your data, turning that around so that your partners can use it is not a huge amount of effort, as we'll see. And if you're doing it, you get all the benefits of the Looker platform. You've got the API, various actions, extensions, custom viz, and all that sort of thing. There's an asterisk there because, as you probably know, whilst there's a lot of depth to the Looker's features, sometimes they conflict or maybe don't quite do exactly what you need. And yeah, as I mentioned, quite often this could be a first step towards kind of embedding. You can see what it would take and what it would look like to have repurposed Looker content in front of your users, and then later go down a more sophisticated route, doing full sort of embedding. So to get started with this sort of thing, what do you need? An existing LookML project. I'm sure we've all got this. We've got it's clean, documented code, nice comments, no commented out craft. It's all performant. Your data warehouse is singing and doesn't cost you very much money, and your calculations are correct. Your dashboards are great, blah, 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 blah. Obviously, I'm kind of joking. You don't have all of that, but it doesn't need to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect, or we'd all be out of a job. And strictly, you don't need an existing LookML project. You could, it would be unusual, but you could start from scratch and build LookML just for a white label Looker data platform project. You could potentially do that as a first step getting into Looker and then think about using it internally. What happened with one of my clients is that I'd actually worked with them for their Looker rollout, and then was back a year and a half later to build their data platform, white labeling Looker. And part of that was, in fact, a remodeling of their main Explore, starting from their partner's kind of perspective, but also to reuse it with more fields and stuff like that internally. You're going to need a separate Looker instance. Some of the configurations, they affect the whole instance, and it would really spoil your internal Looker instance if it was configured like this, because it's a different use case, really. It is just Looker, again, with that slightly unconvincing disguise there. You're going to need some Looker expertise. You could pick it up as you go. The documentation is pretty comprehensive. You can get support from Looker, but you're going to have a much better time if you've got someone who knows Looker well, and ideally someone who's done this sort of thing before. So just putting my hand up there. I have some availability at the moment, and yeah, I'm always happy to have a short call just for the professional interest. Obviously, hoping to get some paid work, but not necessarily. So with these things in place, you need Looker to enable the private label features. It's what they call them, private label, white label, it's the same thing, and the closed system settings as well. So you have those settings available in the admin. And the private label features, as I said, are essentially about removing traces of Looker from your instance. And there's a big list here. I won't go through them all. They're just places where you'd see the Looker logo, mentions of Looker. There's a couple here at the end with asterisks for having PDFs, having your own logo in the PDFs, or maybe just removing the Looker logo, I can't remember, and Looker logo and embeds. That, as well as the private label features in general, they do have a cost implication. And given that it's it's software as a service, so it's a call us for pricing type thing, does mean there's potentially room for negotiation. So if you happen to be a large scale Looker instance, you might be able to get that for minimal or potentially even no cost. So once you've got your Looker instance, there's a few areas of configuration that you're almost certainly going to do, because the use case is generally like the same use case. These things almost certainly, unless you've got a really strange, unusual data model, you're probably going to do these. Private label features on the previous slide. You will, I guess, decide like how much you care about your partners knowing that it's Looker behind under the hood, and go through and get rid of those mentions or not. Or you might like want to keep the links to documentation so they can help themselves. The closed system, what that actually does is it removes the all users group, so there's no way to like apply actions to all users via a group anymore. It makes all users' personal folders private by default, and it makes it so that a user can only see any other users if they're in the same group. So if you imagine you've got a group per partner, if I try and share my personal folder, I'm only going to see people who I work with, which is what you want, because you want to kind of hide like your partners from each other and their existence as well as obviously their data. You're going to have to do some configuration with user groups and roles, as well as user attributes. Those support a few other things. For example, access filters and maybe access grants, so that your partner users only see the appropriate data. And you'll do some configuration with folders, assuming that you've got data that applies to all of your partners and you're filtering it so they only see theirs. Then you're probably going to be building dashboards that can be used by all of them. And so you'd have a shared folder and all of your partner groups would need access to that. You might have some bespoke reporting that only applies to a single partner, and you can put that in a subfolder. And having your partners in groups makes all that permissioning quite easy. Assuming you do have that existing LookML model and want to reuse it, again, the process is pretty well defined. There might be some variation depending on your scenario, but it's pretty likely you're going to be doing pretty much this, which is using remote dependency. Dependencies in Looker is where you're importing code from a different project. There is a local dependency option. It's really not a good idea to try and use that for this sort of scenario. I will explain why shortly. But the remote dependency, you put some stuff in your manifest file pointing to a Git repository and a Git ref, which could be a branch, maybe a release tag, or even a single commit. And that is the version of the code Looker will import. When you save that file, you'll see the Update Dependencies button. You may well be familiar with this already. You might have to click it a few times because it's doing multiple Git things under the bonnet. But once it's actually loaded that code, it will sit there in the Imported Projects folder and then in a subfolder with the dependency name. Those files you can browse, but they're read-only. But that shows you the code like at that actual version, so you can see it. And then reusing that code is just the same as doing includes, except that you prefix it with a double slash and then the dependency name. And assuming that you've got a well-designed, I'm sure you have, well-designed, well-architected LookML model, that Explore file will then be including all the stuff it needs to. So all you need to do is include that, and then that Explore exists on your external instance. Potentially, that might be all you need to do. More likely, you're going to add some customizations, and the general pattern here is going to be doing a refinement. So I've got a simple cosmetic one here to change the label, and I'm adding an access filter. If you don't know what access filters are, it's a construct in Looker which lets you tell Looker in this Explore, go find this user attribute and use it to filter this field. So in this case, our Orders Explore has got a product brand field, and we want to make sure that our partners only see data for their brand. So we have a user attribute for this, and I wish I had Calvin Klein as a client. Their value for this attribute is actually a Looker filter string, so it's comma separated so it can match two values. If you ever need to get those, you can get them from the UI. You can set up your filter as normal and then change the type to match as advanced, and it shows you the expression you need to put in here. And with this bit of LookML code in this user attribute, when a user in that group who's got that attribute set comes to run a query, Looker will insert something into the where clause, so they'll only see their data. If you need to do something more advanced than this, then a single like attribute value, even with the filter expression, doesn't work. You could do the same thing with SQL always where, kind of manually, if maybe like the information was dependent on some other table or something like that. And yeah, that will get you most of the way. You've then got your Explore. It's filtered for your partner's data only, and then you could easily put dashboards on that, and they'd only see their own data. So pretty straightforward. There's various challenges you hit when you're reusing a LookML model. You might have seen these if you're doing like you've got multiple projects anyway, or potentially multi-instance. It's another running photo actually. It's from 2 years ago in 2021. I was about 2/3 of the way through my first half marathon. It makes quite a good Slack emoji as well. If there's business scenarios that have that kind of emotion, which Looker never ever does. So yeah. Localization, Looker's localization feature, you cannot enable if you are doing project import. So if the localization part and Looker's feature is important to you, you'll need to find some other way of doing this without importing the project. The access filters, or even if you're using SQL Always Where, if you're referencing a user attribute and there's some persistence involved, Looker's going to complain, because what will happen is if our Calvin Klein user comes along, runs something, Looker will say, oh, I need to build this table with Calvin Klein in the filter. If another partner comes along, Looker will say, oh, I need to build the table again, which is not great if you're persisting stuff. Solutions to that, you could copy and paste the code and remove the persistence. You could refactor the internal code so that you add the persistence via extension, and then when you import it, you import the non-extended part. You could potentially do a view that's like selecting from your materialized table and then doing the filtering afterwards. But like many things in Looker, it's kind of a problem-solving challenge of figuring out how to achieve the things that you want. Breaking changes in general, like you're depending on someone else's code, and if that's being actively developed, it's quite possible that something that worked yesterday doesn't work today when you try and update the code. My general recommendation is try and keep in sync as much as you can, because if there's a breaking change, dealing with that is one thing. Dealing with that when it's in the middle of like 10 other changes either side is going to be a lot more complicated. And that applies to the LookML code, but particularly to data warehouse changes. At least with the LookML code and the remote dependency, you have control over when the code gets updated, and you can deal with the problems then. If someone changes overnight, like the structure of your tables, that's going to break stuff immediately. And whereas your internal Looker team are likely quite close to or the same people as people working on a data warehouse, you're a little bit more removed. So you've got to be aware of that and make sure you're in the loop there. Time zones is not, again, it's not exclusive to white labeling. It's a pain. I'm lucky that I live in the UK, so we can generally default to UTC. Not going to make sense if you've got North American customers, so you're going to have to deal with the pain of time zones. You might want to do including of your LookML dashboards. That will work if your model is called the exact same thing, but probably not a good idea for a few reasons. You should also never include a model file in general. I've seen people do this not for white labeling. It's just going to be a bad time. Model files are the only special LookML files. It's where Looker starts looking for models and starts resolving all the includes and everything. So it's really just best to start from scratch. Apart from anything, you probably want to take it slowly and do it like a bit at a time, one export at a time, make sure you've got all the filtering correct and all that sort of thing. There's another slide of this. The data filtering makes your dev process and testing even more complicated, because you're expecting different users to see different things. So things like Looker data tests aren't really going to help because they run as the user who's currently active. There are potential solutions, but unfortunately, you're probably going to have to implement them yourself largely. If you're taking reports from other tools, like say from Tableau, they work kind of differently, and so whilst with Tableau you may have like a SQL query that powers a report, putting that into Looker will get you most of the way, but you need to understand that Looker really wants to be generating the query for you, and it wants your measures to be like aggregations and stuff like that. If you're lucky, you'll have like a smart analyst who's really keen to learn Looker, who's the one who built the Tableau reports, who can help you there. Refinements and extensions in Looker are really useful. They do have some limitations. Like I discovered that I couldn't use an extension to add the same join to different explorers, which is a real pain because it meant I had to repeat the code. Again, not exclusive to white labeling. There is a possibility, and this is, I guess, is a multi-instance thing, that you could end up on different versions with your Looker instances. Particularly, you might consider using the extended support release cycle for your white label instance, so that there's slower updates and less chance of bugs. And so there's a slim chance that you might end up with like a new or deprecated feature on one or other instance, which means that the LookML actually doesn't work the same on both of them or at all. And this one, which I'm going to repeat a few times, now it's a production system. Once you've got something that's facing paying customers, even if they're not actually paying for the tool itself, but they're your paying customers, it's a very different scenario. And the way you deal with things, the way you have to handle your development is probably going to be quite different. And so your dev life cycle, you're probably going to want to lock down a bit more. At the same time, it's quite likely that there's going to be a small team working on this project, potentially just you. So you might not really want to go through like pull request approvals and branch protection. But yeah, it's worth considering. There are more technical challenges that aren't just to do with LookML. It's quite a funny one. A couple of times, different projects that I've had this. You get everything built, you get ready, you tested it all, you send out your invite emails, you're refreshing the system activity, trying to see if anyone's logged in and they haven't. So you email someone and say, "Oh, we haven't received any invites." It turns out that their email system is looking at the emails that come from like hello@lookatemail.com or whatever and just dropping them. And so in one situation, we manually sent invite emails by getting the link to people. In another, we compiled them all into a list and let them sort it out for themselves. There's lots of areas for customization and things like the messaging, the custom welcome email and things like that. If you want them to be bespoke for your partners, that's really nice. But you need to remember that and then change it if you're inviting a user from another partner, or ideally find some way of kind of automating that stuff. I don't know if there are API endpoints for that. There may be. And automation in general, I mean, Looker's great in that you can automate a lot of stuff. The API is very good. The challenge with that is that you kind of have to build it yourself. So you need some sort of a tool already, or to build something which will interact with Looker to do that automation. Testing again is kind of another side of the same coin. You'll almost certainly be doing a lot of manual testing to make sure exactly what your partner users are going to see and what they're not going to see. They only see their data and that sort of thing. Automating that sort of stuff, I think it would be possible. Again, it's a challenge. And honestly, because I've been in these projects for the kind of like the initial stages, I've not had to really use any automation. It would be something that'd be nice, but like it's only going to make sense if you're at a sort of pretty serious scale, I think. And monitoring in general, you have system activity. There are also some monitoring endpoints in Looker that you can plug into something like Datadog, so you can see like how quickly it's responding or if it goes down completely. And those are great, so you know what's going on. Overall, though, you have to remember that now it is a production system, and so if you are monitoring Looker, if you're not doing this internally, you should probably have someone that gets paged if it goes down to deal with it. And it just it makes it quite a different thing to deal with, to think about. The point here is that the reporting that you build internally is likely to be quite different to what you want to show partners. And sure, like a dashboard that works reporting across all your partners with some filtering would be correct and would only show that the partner their own data, is not necessarily going to look very nice if you've got, say, like a stacked column per partner and then they're just seeing one column. So it might not really be exactly what you need, but it could be a good starting point. And it's possible that people internally in the organization haven't actually really thought about what partners want to see. So stuff to consider there. I wouldn't recommend like including actual LookML dashboard files directly, partly because in my context, I've changed the model name so I can control what's in the URL of what people see. There are benefits to having LookML dashboards for like dev and production, but in reality, you're going to be changing stuff anyways. There's probably not much value to that. My general approach, and this has partly been because I've been early on in projects and it's quite small scale, is just doing the manual thing of getting the LookML from the original dashboard, putting it into a file on my white label instance, and then probably just converting it to a user-defined dashboard then, and then using the UI to change it up a bit. If you're at larger scale than that, or you just want to be more sophisticated and automated, there are some tools. There's Gazer. There's also Looker Deployer, which uses Gazer internally, which will allow you to programmatically do these sorts of things. If you're reusing content, you're going to have a concern about making sure that it stays kind of synchronized, as in still correct. If it changes internally or definitions or something change, there's not really a good way to do that. It's an organizational process thing again. And again, content errors is something you need to keep an eye on. Something like Spectacle is probably going to help there. I don't know how it works with multiple instances, but I'm sure the guys there can help you out there. And once again, now it's a production system. You know, if you break like, you know, your CTO or CEO's dashboard, that's a big deal. But like someone's sitting next to you, the dashboard breaks, you can fix it fine. Doing that for your paying customers is a different thing. So access controls are very important, obviously. My general recommendation for feature access for a white label project is start with no explore. Start with the minimal set of permissions you possibly can. Only let your users do the minimum amount of stuff that they need to get some value out of it. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that it's just a general smaller surface area of things to consider and support. You know, if you want to put your explores in front of your partners, it's possible that there might be fields that you don't want to see. There might be values that even with the data filtering you don't want to be available to them, or even field descriptions might leak something. And the final point is that if you start off by giving them less, then later you can say, oh, well, you want to make your own dashboards. Oh, well, you could have our advanced analytics offerings. There's a bit of an upsell possibility there. For data access, we've seen the access filters already. It's possible, like I said, you've got that your data isn't all shared like that and doesn't work like that, or you've got data sets that only apply to particular clients. There's options, of having separate explorers and access grants. You can even have access grants on joins. I'd also recommend keeping very small kind of focused model sets so you can kind of modularize things, because you may well be building different tranches of reporting, and so you can have those and roll them out sort of in stages. Content access is pretty straightforward, I think. If you have data like an Explorer that applies to all your partners and is being filtered and you have dashboards built off that, you're going to need a shared folder they can all access. You'll likely want to have something like a shared folder for each partner so that you can build things that are just for them, or maybe if you're giving them Explorer access, they can build their own stuff. And all of this can be as complex and as fine-grained as you like. The Looker access and permissioning system is pretty comprehensive. You could have, say, subgroups of permissions within different partners. And almost all of this stuff is going to be working via user groups. Generally, you should be doing this in Looker anyway, because it makes your life easier. For this sort of a project, it's pretty much non-negotiable, because you just need to be able to refer to these partners as users collectively. And with groups, you can assign roles directly. So if I add a partner to their group, they should get the correct role for that. You can set their user attributes, which are used for a bunch of different things, like access filters, access grants, custom landing pages, potential locale and time zones. Don't forget, we've got the closed system, so users need to be in a group together in order to be able to, say, share things with each other. And you might have more than one group per partner, potentially, because they may want some people to have access to report A, some to have access to report B, some to have access to everything, and it's quite flexible. You can also nest user groups in Looker, and it does mean that you can get given an attribute value via nested group membership. Like many things, this is something that I don't automatically have a very good clear model of in my head, so it's complexity that I just avoid unless I absolutely have to. And yeah, if you get to that point, make sure you understand it, go through the docs, test it, check it's doing what you want. Roles, hopefully we all have internalized in our heads that a role in Looker is a model set plus a permission set, and the permissions apply to use of that model. Roles are also additive, so you can have more than one role and you get all of that stuff, which means you can give people different levels of access to different models. You could also modularize, like I was saying, if you have different tranches of reporting, you can gradually give them more access. And again, you can have these roles assigned by the groups. The groups would also assign user attributes. It's very important with all these things, though. Don't forget about your developers, because access grants, access filters, as well as user attributes like landing pages, they apply to everyone, regardless if they're an admin or a developer. And what you probably want for your access filters is a wildcard, so that when you're developing, you see all the data. If you want to see what a partner sees, you would sudo impersonate one of those. You're going to need to give your developers permission to sudo as those other users, so they can see what they see, because again, the challenge here is that different users will be seeing different things. Is what we want. We need to be able to pretend to be those users to check that. And the access grants, access filters, probably a wildcard, probably add to all access grants. And yeah, if you're having landing pages for your partners, you might put a document in there to explain to your developers how all this complicated configuration works. And for testing, you're probably going to need to set up some dummy users who you can assign the permissions of your partners to check that they are actually seeing what they see or what you want them to see. When you're doing that, I'd recommend you actually consider having a separate role for the dummy accounts, so that those dummy users can also see LookML and see SQL and maybe see queries and stuff, because otherwise your development is going to be very, very slow, because you need to deploy your code so that a non-dev user can see it. When you're that non-dev user, if they're locked down, they can't see the SQL, you're going to really struggle to debug something if it's not working properly. And yeah, with all of this, test. You're going to be testing stuff manually. Get some colleagues involved, use the Google Gmail Plus trick to get some free email addresses, invite them as your partner users, just to check that everything is how you think it is. So you should be doing this internally anyway on your Looker instance, but there are various ways that you can add some kind of tweaks and some shiny things just to make the user experience as good as you can. The first area of that is just the built-in Looker and LookML features. Things like drill fields are so easy that you should always be using them. Slightly more complicated, doing dynamic link things with Liquid. You can do all sorts of smart stuff there. Putting text and markdown in buttons in your dashboard so that they link up, so you can have a bit of a storybook type thing, which Looker doesn't really support. Or if you want to get really sophisticated, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff using the HTML parameter and Liquid for fields. You can have things like dashboard headers that have links to different dashboards but are passing through filter values. You could have a header that's showing your partner's logo and that sort of thing. Having landing pages for different groups of users is good as well. You can set that via user attributes, so you can set that via group so that all of a particular partner users go to a particular page. Any relative URL within Looker it can be. So that could be a markdown document, which is decent but not very dynamic. You could just send them to a folder or maybe a board. You could also do some more like HTML hack stuff and add some fields so that you make links that come out of your explores and your dashboard tiles if you really want to get crazy. There's a bit of a challenge here where if you need images or potentially like linking to like a PDF or something, I've often found that like getting a file hosted on the internet is a surprisingly difficult thing in lots of organizations for various reasons. Even like setting up an S3 bucket to do that can be quite a convoluted process. So my solution has often been to use GitHub or GitLab pages because it's a very easy way to just like put a static website online that then you can reference from Looker. You don't really want to be hot linking images from random places on the internet because it's a bit of a security risk. There's custom messaging you can put in, the custom welcome emails. You can have your own bespoke documentation linked from Looker again, there's a bit of a question about how manual this stuff is going to be and if it's going to be bespoke to different partners and how you manage that. So there are some organizational challenges you'll face as well. One is ownership. It's quite likely that there will be multiple kind of stakeholder groups in an organization. As a data team, you're probably going to be involved. There's probably going to be like customer success or account management or something like that. You just really need to be clear on who's actually owning this thing and make sure someone is owning it, even if it's not the entirety of their role, so that when something goes wrong or there's a question or a problem, it's pretty clear who to go to and how those communication lines work. Looker knowledge is obviously going to be fairly important because learning Looker as you go is one thing. Doing that when it's Looker plus all the white label stuff is an extra layer of complexity. So ideally, you'll get someone with some Looker knowledge, even for a short time, who they can help, like maybe your permanent staff. Just going to put my website link in there again, just, like I do have some availability and I do really love talking about Looker. Reusing code, content, anything is always going to be a bit of a challenge because you need to kind of keep it synchronized, you need to communicate, you need to make sure that things don't break or that when they do, you've got a way of fixing them pretty quickly. And this is a bit of it's a minor one, but just be aware, like this is something that you spend a lot of time on and focused on. You spend a lot of time listening to boring webinars and reading the docs and everything, and you've built the thing and you've launched it. And then, they might not log in for a few days. They might log in and like download something to Excel and that'll be it or whatever. Just be aware, they might not be as excited as you. And the last one, and this is the second last time I will say this, now it's a production system, which has impacts like slightly outside of just technical stuff, but as an organization, you need to remember this is now kind of part of your product as a business. So just to summarize, it's pretty easy to get started white labeling Looker, bit of configuration, potentially a bit of money to get some settings added, and your existing code and dashboards, and you're good to go. There's some pretty straightforward patterns which are likely to apply to what you're doing. There's also the flexibility to go outside of that if you need to, which is pretty common to things with Looker anyway. There is some extra complexity and risk involved. I mean, the complexity is really just that it's Looker plus some extra stuff, plus you've now got internal Looker and external Looker to think about. Risk is largely around the data, I guess, and I suppose contractual things, but just to be aware of that. Outstanding question about lots of these things. Do we do them manually? Do we make our own automations? And this is the last time. Now it is a production system. Say it with me. However, I don't think it should be intimidating or you should be really kind of like scared of this stuff. Like you can just take your time, make sure like you understand what you're doing, test everything thoroughly, be methodical, and it will be fine, I think. And the last one is find someone to help. And I'll say it one more time, like I am always happy to talk about Looker. I'm happy to have like a quick call just to chat through anything really. So there we go. Thank you for listening. Hopefully we've got a reasonable amount of time for some questions. I did warn you that I had quite a lot to say.
Thank you, Simon. That was fantastic. And what a wealth of knowledge you are. It's clear that you've hit some of the rough edges of these implementations and had to think through things at a really detailed level. So really appreciate you sharing all of the tips that you have. Folks, we will be doing, I'll just say this one last time, we'll be doing Q&A in Slack. I've posted the invite link in Zoom chat. So hop on over there, join the channel called Webinar, a quick guide on Looker white labeling. Post your questions there. While people are posting questions, Simon, I'll ask the first one. What's kind of the most impactful use of white labeling that you've seen in your career? Like, how do customers tend to get an advantage out of something like this?
I think really it's almost as if you're kind of like bringing them into your office and seeing what your analysts see, because you are literally taking what you're doing in Looker, which hopefully is giving you deep insight to everything that's going on in your business, and taking like the slice of that that's relevant to your partners and giving it to them. I'd say in that context, that particular one, they did go with Explore Access from the start because that was kind of a big part of it. They already had some dashboards built into their system, so just having more dashboards wasn't really so useful. But it also meant that the dashboards they did build were very, very tightly linked so that when a particular thing happened in the data, you saw links to the next relevant dashboard for that, which is an example of where the Hacky liquid is quite useful, because you can, if you're willing to spend the time and do the kind of the messy code within the LookML parameters, you can make your drill menu contextual so that based on the value of some other field, you see some link or some other link. And yeah, so like being able to get right into the data, I think that's what really kind of gives them the value. I think I
And I
need
guess
to.
along those lines, like where do you find people struggle to switch from a thinking about this as internal BI mindset into thinking about this as a data product mindset?
Um, I think mostly people already have that kind of mindset. It's just that it's a different audience for the product. And so, like with Looker internally, it's kind of about unlocking all of your data for all of your staff. Whereas this is kind of taking that you've already done and then taking a slice out of it, so that that's the part for your partners. Yeah, I'd say it's a slightly. I mean, it's a bit of a joke really to reiterating the point about production system, but that's kind of it's the mindset shift. Whereas someone who you work with, who you can shout to or just Slack, if there's something that doesn't make sense in the dashboard, that's one thing. But if it's a partner who you haven't got that tight communication with, you need to think about things differently and have a much more of a kind of production kind of mindset with it.
Totally. I would be remiss in not plugging a few things from our side that are hyper relevant here. We work with a lot of customers who are multi-instance Looker deployments, and one of the things that we find is that it's challenging to determine what kind of content errors might arise by shipping the LookML that exists on your development instance into your production instance. And so one of the things you can do with Spectacles, and we'd be happy to show you how this works if you're thinking about going down this road, is you can test one or more production instances that you have with the versions of your code that exist in development. So you can make sure that when you migrate that LookML from your development instance to your production instance, dashboards won't break, SQL won't be different, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely check out some of the resources that we have around. We've done a webinar in the past on multi-instance deployment, and we'd be happy to show you in a demo as well how that might work. The other thing I'll just say is, the cool thing about white labeling is you get into a lot of the interesting features of Looker around access, which Simon talked through, around deployment, which he talked through. So we've done webinars in the past on a lot of these topics. Check out our YouTube channel. I posted one in Slack on access control and permission management. There's another one in there on row-level access controls. But just getting into some of the nuances of how to make sure that your partners or customers have sort of a tailored view of only what they're allowed to see within Looker. We've created a lot of content and how-to webinars on that. So check those out. Cool. Well, I think that's all we have for questions. So Simon, I'll just again reiterate, please reach out to Simon if this is something you're interested in doing. He's got a lot of knowledge on this topic, but thanks for joining us and sharing everything that you've learned. And we will be taking a bit of a break on webinars over the holidays here for the month of December, but hope to be back in the new year with some new new and interesting topics. So stay tuned on our website and our mailing list if you'd like to learn more about those. Thanks everyone for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again, Simon.
Cheers.
Bye.